The most interesting story from my time in the Pac-12 would have to be the 7 days of Stanford upsetting USC in the Coliseum, and then the very next Saturday, Oregon State knocking off Cal with Kevin Riley running around when they couldn't get the field goal off, when basically USC was knocked out of the number one spot in college football, and the next weekend Cal had an opportunity to move into the number one spot in college football. Think about that, Pac-12 fans, by the way. 2 consecutive weeks, 2 of our teams had an opportunity to be the number one team in the nation. So that alone, but it was just 7 days. I mean, one Saturday and then the next Saturday. And I said after, I said, boy, I don't know if I'm ever going to have as exciting a week in my time producing television. And I've had some pretty exciting moments, but 2 in a row like that, not ever since. And it's been 13 years. So I still have hope. And we've had some great moments, but those 2 moments back to back, weekend to weekend, is pretty remarkable. And I'm pretty fortunate to have been involved. I know Ted was involved in the Cal game. And you were involved in the SC game, if I remember, Yogi. So I'm bookended by you two. I should be in the middle, I guess, on this little thing. But so that's my story to kick it off, because that's probably the one people remember the most of the games I've been involved in.
So Yogi, if we ever get maybe we should pitch this idea to the powers of our network, the wide world of Pac-12 sports. If we had that anthology show and the opening, the thrill of victory, there would be Harbaugh running off the field at the Collie on Saturday. And then the agony of defeat was one of the greatest shots I've ever seen in my life. The following Saturday, the incredible playboard smash onto the field by Jeff Tedford when that win opportunity got away from Cal, when it was extraordinary. I mean, who thought Cal was going to be number one in the country? Just say that to anybody today. They go, what? 2007? Yeah, they were going to be number one. But anyway, that was one of the great individual shots that I've ever been a part of.
John McDonough, the great John McDonough, directing that game. God rest his soul. And Versus Television was what network those 2 games were on, by the way. The big V upper left, if you remember it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good. We got to get Tedford on this show. We're going to start bringing on some guests, and I'll reach out to Jeff and see if Coach wants to come on, and not necessarily relive that moment, but he's had some pretty powerful ones in his career. All right, Ted, what you got?
All right, so I'm going to go back to when I first started in the Pac, and that was 1985, and I was a young guy that got a chance to broadcast Stanford, and the head coach of Stanford football was Jack Elway. Now, Jack Elway, obviously, was the father of John. How did Jack Elway get that job? Jack Elway, who was an extraordinary offensive innovator in his era, had been the head coach at San Jose State, which is about 14 miles from Stanford. 1981, 82, and 83. 3 straight years, San Jose State beat Stanford. All 3 years, they beat them at Stanford. And the first 2 years, the Stanford quarterback was John Elway. Jack Elway took his little San Jose State team in 3 years in a row to beat Stanford. 2 of those years beating his kid. So Stanford turned around and said, come on over, you're our guy. So I get there, and Jack is in his second year as the Stanford coach. And I have never met a football coach anything like Jack. He was a baseball manager that got trapped in football because he was a brilliant football mind. I would go into his office during the week. I had to record shows with him, and we would sit there, and he would just tell stories. He would tell me stories for half hour, 45 minutes, teaching me about football. And finally, Jan Steele, this wonderful Jan Steele was his assistant, would have to come in, and this would happen at least half the times. Jan would not, Coach actually practices in 10 minutes. I'm not kidding. And he's in there talking to this young slappy trying to teach me a little bit about football. So the great part about Jack was that he really the closest guy I've ever seen to a part of Jack is Leach. And the difference is that Leach doesn't talk about football and hates if you ask him a football question. Jack just talked about football, but he would just tell stories. And there's no storytellers in football. Jack also was a guy that had a familiar place right across the street at the Town and Country Shopping Center that after his work for the night was over, Jack would go and unwind there. Well, we all knew that about Jack. Jack was a guy that enjoyed a cocktail at night. So now, Jack, I move on. Jack's next stop after Stanford is the Frankfurt Galaxy of the World League of American Football, which was started by the NFL in 1991. And it's the league that eventually became NFL Europe. But when it started, its first 2 years, most of the teams were in the U.S. And there were three teams in Europe: London, Barcelona, and Frankfurt. And I was assigned the first year, 1991. I did the games from the European cities back to the United States on USA Network. So the week that we go to do the game in Frankfurt, it's Raleigh-Durham, coached by Roman Gabriel Rams fans, against the Frankfurt Galaxy. Here's the shirt, coached by Jack Elway. This is the eventual team. This is the team that Oliver Luck ended up running. This shirt's from 1991. I still have it. It was the team that Oliver Luck ended up running, and Andrew Luck grew up there rooting for that team. But Jack was the first coach. So why is that funny? Because the game is on a Saturday night, and we went, obviously it was like a 5-day trip, and we were flying home on Monday. So on Sunday, we had a day off. We're going to go see something outside of Frankfurt. So Mary and I get in a car. I'm 32, 33 years old. We drive up this river out of Frankfurt, and we go to some town about 30, 40 kilometers outside of Frankfurt. Don't know where, we just pull off. Let's just go wander. It's Sunday. So we wander up this alleyway, and of course it's Sunday in Germany, so the beer halls are open. The first beer hall, I'm not kidding you, the first beer hall we walk by, "Hey, Ted, come over here." And I turn around, Jack Elway and one of his assistant coaches are sitting there with a stein of beer like this. And we went over and sat and had a little beer with Jack Elway. And that's who he was. He was an extraordinary guy. He was so proud of his son. My God, I have never in my life run across a father any prouder and more protective of his son than Jack was of John. But we all had somebody that helped us. And in football, the first guy that really took the time to actually teach me a little bit about football was Stanford's Jack Elway.
That is awesome.
Is there a day of the week the beer hall isn't open in Germany?
No,
That's the one question I had. Okay, sorry.
No.
And how many beers did you have with Coach Elway?
No, only one. I can't speak for Coach.
Yeah,
one for me because we had to drive back to Frankfurt. But I can't make that. But that's Jack. He was he was a magnificent guy. So every time I bumped into John through the years, and I didn't know John, he had already gone to the NFL by the time I was at Stanford. But I've come across him a bunch of times in the NFL years, and he always smiles when I tell him how good his father was. His father was he talked a little bit like Mr. Magoo. He had a little bit of a monotone ramble to him, but which was not good. He wanted to get into TV. The last time I talked to him, he asked me to help him get into television. That was not going to be a successful play, but he actually and took Stanford. Had one good bowl game. Remember Brad Muster, Yogi?
I don't.
You don't remember Brad Muster? Okay, forget it. All right, Yogi, your turn.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to explain who Mr. Magoo was to Yogi next time, though, but go ahead, Yogi.
Okay, this one is kind of timely. So as I referenced earlier, I was talking to a coach in the NFL today, and he had me give my analysis on the quarterbacks coming out of this conference. And this conference, as Ted, you know better than anybody, is known for the quarterbacks. And this year we're talking Jake Luton, Steven Montez, Anthony Gordon, and the two at the top, Jacob Eason and Justin Herbert, regarding getting evaluated by people in the National Football League. Their ceiling is their floors, their traits, etc. And as I started talking about Justin Herbert, who we called his final regular season game, the three of us, the Civil War, he talks to the team for the first time. He breaks down all the stuff that we know and waxed on. You can check it out at pac-12.com. But it got me thinking about people who come back for their senior year. And it got me thinking to people who have alpha inside of them, but they don't show it every day. That's who I think Justin Herbert is. And it got me thinking about a moment in 2009, my first year broadcasting, and a guy by the name of Jake Locker decided to return for his senior year. He was projected as a top 10 draft pick. At the time, it was still millions of dollars that you can make as a top 10 draft pick. Steve Sarkisian became the head coach there. Coach Sark called me up, who I had known for a long time, and he said, "Hey, this guy's coming back. I think it might be a great story." So here I am thinking, yeah, this is a great story. Let's go. Call up a producer at ESPN and Original Films. Her name's Joan Lynch. I said, "Joan, I think I got access to this kid's story. Want to track him all year?" And ESPN that year did a thing called the Year of the Quarterback, where everything was quarterback, from Elite 11 to documentaries to series to segments in College Game Day. Everything was about the quarterback position. She's like, let's go. Let's fly there right now. So it's me, John Hawk, who has won multiple Emmy Awards as a documentary filmmaker, multiple 30 for 30s as a filmmaker. He shows up, and it's Jake Locker, his mom and his dad. They're from Ferndale, Washington. If you haven't been there, you probably missed it when you drove by. It's about population 1,000. There ain't anything there. And we sit there at the table, almost like it's in the movie The Program when they're pitching the quarterback from the program. Have you ever watched that old college football movie? It's one of my favorites. I make my wife and I watch it before every season. And he's sitting at the table, and we're basically pitching him, hey, Jake, let us track you your whole senior year. And he goes, I don't really feel comfortable with like microphones and cameras on me. That's not my personality, but I know what it'll do for the program. As long as you promise to not make it about me, which of course it was about him. As long as you don't make it about me and it's only the Jake Locker show, I guess I'll do it. Because that program was downtrodden. One coming off maybe 1-11, or I don't even know if they won a game the previous year. And they take over and they go to a bowl game. And we mic'd him throughout the season. He had some epic wins, some dramatic losses, but we mic'd him up in his final game. It was the first time that I believe a college player was mic'd up in a game. And I'll never forget it because here I am on the sideline. He got Sark calling plays in one ear, Jake mic'd up in the other. I know the plays, so I'm predicting everything from the sideline, watching it happen in real time. And here's this guy who you hear and you feel him in the huddle, because they huddled back then. You hear him compete and grunt and fight and claw. And I think they beat Nebraska that night. I think that's who they played it was the Holiday Bowl. I'll never forget it because I think of Justin Herbert in the same vein of a guy who's quiet, who came back to work on those interpersonal skills about him and himself. And he knew himself and his skin, and he's got alpha to him, but it's not in the way that you would see with Jalen Hurts or Tua or Joe Burrow. He's got it in his own way. And when I was talking to that coach today about Herbert, it made me think about Jake Locker, and Jake never made it about him, which of course always made it about him. And I think that's what a lot of the great ones do.
Wow, that's a great story. Man, he was a great college player, wasn't he?
Yeah.
You must have seen it, Yogi. I don't know if you've seen it, Ted. Within the last year, there was a tremendous article in The Athletic on Locker that, if you haven't seen it, definitely worth finding in the archives. It kind of brings his story up to date a little bit.
Yeah, and if you need a doc, so what ended up happening, just as a side note here, or footnote, we don't follow him all season long because he is uncomfortable with cameras. So we end up picking a couple games, and we do a film called 3 for the Show. It's the first film I was ever a part of, and it's Jake Locker, Tyrod Taylor, and Cam Newton, and it's their senior years and their path to the draft. And the Tyrod Taylor one, Ted, was the year they play in the Orange Bowl against Andrew Luck. And we mic up Harbaugh in the game. And there's great sound of all that. And, of course, the reference, we mic'd up Jake throughout the season. And then Cam ended up being the #1 pick. So it's a cool film if you need something now in the downtime. 3 for the Show. Check it out on ESPN. It's in the archives somewhere on the internet, I'm sure.
Little addendum, because I was just checking my facts to be sure, because Locker, it's another Pac-12 story here. Locker's first year at Washington, he redshirted. And Washington started 4-1, and their starting quarterback suffered a season-ending injury. And Tyrone Willingham was coaching, and Tyrone refused to pull Jake Locker's red shirt. And think about that. That's 14 years ago now. Today, they put him out there right now. Jake Locker was okay, and Tyrone refused. He didn't want to sacrifice the future for that year, and the Huskies they went from 4-1 to 5-7 because the quarterback that ended up playing wasn't at the same level. And that's why Locker had that extra year to come back. But I always remembered, I admired Tyrone Willingham because he suffered, his coaching resume suffered, his future suffered because he refused to pull that red shirt off Jake Locker.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. So many stories, and that's why you come to this podcast. So subscribe, and for real, rate it and review it. It helps the podcast, it helps populate it for Pac-12 fans. You're starving for content. That's why we're here. Ted, Michael, myself, we're going to start adding some guests. Hit us up on social, what you'd like, and of course, check out the YouTube channels. All those Ted's and mine are in the show notes. So if you want to watch it, see Molinari. It's not Jason Bateman. It's Michael Molinari.
Ozark.
Yeah,
Ozark's a
Ozark.
good. Yeah, that's my recommendation for you.
And next time, Ted, we need to talk about Tiger King because we binged it over the weekend, and that doc series on Netflix is worthy of a few minutes on our next podcast.
So my friend John Wertheim of tennis and 60 Minutes fame, I'm going to steal a quote from him. He said, "It's bat crazy." That's what he said, right?
Bro, it's every episode. It's
Okay.
crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'll have to sample them for next week. Thanks, guys.
Everybody
All right.
stay safe.
You too. Talk to you soon.